father used to say to me, when are you going to be qualified enough? Why don't you just stop learning? So there was this idea of, at some point you have to stop, because what good does it do? And you just couldn't understand why I wanted to just keep learning. And it wasn't collecting qualifications. It was, well, the more I learn, the more I know, the more I can do out in the world. And there was just this sense of, this cultural leaning towards what's the point in that? Your point is to go out, get working, make the most of yourself in the space that you're in, and that's as much as you can expect for your life, where I obviously was pushing back on that. But it was weird. I remember calling a friend and saying, I'm just reading all of this stuff saying I shouldn't be doing this. It's implausible that I should be in the space that I'm in. And that just sort of fueled that sense of otherness at a subconscious and at a conscious level as well, I think. And that's why it probably hit me so hard when it did.
I'm Johnny, and I have our definition of the day. Well, technically, it's not a definition. It's really an anti-definition. It's actually something our guest today has said many times, and in a very colorful way. And that anti-definition is, it's not a bloody syndrome. We'll be getting to that later. But if you love what we're doing, please follow us on social and everywhere you get your favorite podcasts. Today's guest is Dr. Terri Simpkin, coming all the way from Australia. So let's dive in. Dr. Simpkin is an innovative academic, a consultant, and a public speaker focused on helping individuals and organizations reach their full potential. Frustrated by slow progress in workplace inclusion, she developed professional programs, Braver, Stronger, Smarter, and Faking It, based on her research into the imposter phenomenon, aiming to reduce its impact and promote inclusion. Terri's worked with industry associations, government agencies, and businesses of all sizes, advising on workforce development, skills shortages, and inclusion. As a thought leader for Portman Partners, she provides insights on leadership and workforce change. In education, she's developed leading master programs, contributed to vocational and executive education, and received recognition as one of the 50 most influential women in the data economy. Terri's a regular media contributor, and she served on various boards, including the Baker Deering Educational Trust. Her specialisms include inclusion, the imposter phenomenon, organizational development, leadership, and workforce planning. Some of her honors are Churchill Fellow, CPHR, MCIPD, Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, and Fellow of the RSA. Truly, truly inspiring work that you've done. Dr. Simpkin, welcome.
Thank you. What a lovely warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, where do I find you? And I'm going to love the answer to this question, being in Nashville, Tennessee. Where does this podcast find you?
I'm currently sitting in my lounge room in Hobart, Australia, which is the capital city of the tiny little island that sits off the main big island of Australia. You may recognize the name from the Tasmanian devil from the cartoons. The Tasmanian devil is a real thing. It exists here in Tasmania. Makes a very similar noise, I have to say. So that's where you find me. It's a little bit rainy today, but I'm very pleased to be speaking with you on this topic.
Well, I'm sure you're sick of these jokes, but I think we just started on YouTube. Actually, we launched our YouTube channel, and I'm going to see if our podcast manager can't take your picture and turn it upside down, just for the joke of it all.
Absolutely. It would be rude not to do that, Johnny. I think it would be rude not to.
Well, we get in Nashville, we get a lot of the country music, and for a long time it was, do you guys wear shoes, and like you don't actually marry your cousins, and we've become quite more metropolitan, and we have grown into a little bit of a more cosmopolitan city here in Nashville.
The other way of looking at Tasmania, a bit of a myth, is that it is about as far away from the rest of the world as it's possible to get before hitting Antarctica. There's nothing between here and Antarctica, but people often say that it's not the end of the earth, but you can see it from here on a clear day.
Well, thank you for joining. It's a strange experience to be sitting here and experiencing no real lag time, or the audio quality is really good. So yeah, that's a unique experience, sitting here in Nashville, Tennessee, and talking to you from Tasmania. But again, just very happy to have you. Got some questions for you.
Sure.
And so, with your permission, I'll ask two things. One, may I call you Terri?
Of course, yes.
Fantastic. And then the second is, can I pepper you with questions?
You may pepper me with questions as much as you like. This is a topic close to my own heart. I'm pleased to be talking about it.
Well, what I like to start with really is your genesis. What was it that really inspired you and drew you to this phenomenon of the imposter?
It was a personal experience, actually. I went to university late in life, so I was twice as old as my peers. And so during my undergraduate program, I kept thinking that every time I got a good mark on my work and my results for units were coming back with high distinctions, I thought I better keep quiet because somebody's obviously made some monumental administrative error here. So I'm not going to say anything, and perhaps I could just bob along under the radar and I'll just sort of get through this program with at least a pass, if not something higher, but clearly someone's making a mistake. So I spent all my undergraduate program thinking that at some point or another someone was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, look, yeah, we're terribly sorry, we've given the marks from some other Terri Simpkin to you. And here are your marks, you're going to have to repeat this because you didn't pass or whatever else. And then I was offered the opportunity to do an honours program, which I did, and then that led into an opportunity to do a PhD. And when my potential supervisors suggested that I do a PhD, I literally laughed in their faces, and I thought, look, I've fooled you all until now. There's no way that I'm possibly going to get through a PhD program. You're barking up the wrong tree there. So I put in an application just to keep this guy happy, expecting it to come back saying, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. And surprisingly, it did come back saying, we'd be pleased to have you in the PhD program. And so for a moment, I had this sense of elation, sort of, well, woohoo, I'm going to do a PhD. And then it was, oh my God, they've let me into the PhD. This is really where I'm going to get found out. How am I possibly going to fool my way through this? How am I possibly going to blag it through an actual PhD program? So for 4 years or so, I turned up to my supervisory meetings expecting them just to be nice, that they were giving me all this good feedback because they didn't want to be disparaging of me. And they were waiting for the external examiners to give me the bad news that I should never have been in the program in the first place. And so that's 4 years of this constant crushing self-doubt and procrastination and self-handicapping. And then it got to the point where I needed to hand the thing in. And so in those days, you handed in, a hard copy, which was beautifully bound with gold lettering on the side. And so I'm sitting there in my car, and I physically couldn't get out of my car because I thought, if this thing gets out into the world, everyone's going to know I should never have been doing this. I'm going to have to. So I was fortunate enough to be awarded a postgraduate scholarship. So I got given a huge bucket of money from the government to do the work that I was doing because it was of interest to them. So I thought, I'm going to have to pay the government back. I'm going to have to front all my friends and tell them that I failed. I'm going to have to tell my parents, who were vicariously having all this excitement of having a PhD person in the family, because no one in my family had ever gone to university. So I was sitting there and I was absolutely glued to my chair and I couldn't get out of the car. And I was sitting there thinking, how can I get out of this? What can I do? What excuse can I make to not actually hand this thing in? And it frightened me to the point where I was thinking of some fairly considerable self-harm. And so at that point, I thought, this is beyond just a bit of self-doubt. This is beyond something that I can deal with. So I eventually managed to sort of peel myself out of the car and hand the thing in. And then I sort of came back home and thought, what is this? This is something seriously in need of examination. And so I found there was this thing called, at that point, I knew it to be the imposter syndrome. And so I started doing more digging. And over time, it actually turned into an academic interest of mine. And I ended up doing some global research in 2016, which sort of put me on the path of really lending a huge amount of time to this topic. And of course, the rest is history, with it being a very big part of my life in terms of the professional work that I do, but also talking about it on a personal level to people just around me, but also keynote speeches, workshops, and of course continuing on to support other people in their research. So I've got a couple of PhD students and honours students looking at this as well. So yeah, that's sort of it's a long story, but it was a fairly profound moment where I thought there is something seriously going on that I need to resolve here. It frightened me, actually. It frightened me, the response that I had to it.
Wow. I'll start by saying thank you for the vulnerability and the ability to share all that. I think the world needs so much more of this conversation, especially as it relates to imposterism, imposter phenomenon. You mentioned the self-harm component. I think the data points to a pretty consistent component of anxiety, depression, mental illness issues that ultimately could lead into suicide attempts.
Yeah, in serious circumstances. We know there's a couple of pieces of literature that identify that people who experience this have suicidal ideation. So there is, and this is sort of why I get pretty evangelical about the social media myth that has sprung up around it, because it diminishes the importance. I mean, not everybody is going to have that experience. That's really extreme. But, often people will sort of bob along, having moderate to frequent experiences of imposter phenomenon. And whilst it might not, push into that physical harm, it certainly does, as you say, have a connection with burnout, anxiety, depression. And of course, we know that these are key factors in workplaces, all over the world. All jurisdictions are struggling to diminish the potential and the experience of depression and anxiety around us. So it sort of makes sense that we look at this seriously to identify where those things are actually springing from. And of course, the experience of imposter phenomenon is one of those.
I'd like to kind of dig into a little nugget that when you were telling your history, you mentioned that you were the first of your family to go to university.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, what part in your development of imposter phenomenon within your kind of fundamental self was it that no one from your family going to university? What part did that play in the foundation of you that experiences imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think it having unpacked it a little bit over the years, I think it springs from this platform issue of a sense of otherness. That any form of otherness in a context is fertile ground for the experience of imposter phenomenon. It doesn't necessarily follow, but it is fertile ground for it to sort of take root and flourish. And so for me, that sense of otherness wasn't gender. It wasn't, I actually come from England. And so when I got to Australia, I was mercilessly bullied for my weird and wacky accent, which I have since lost. And, my fashion choices, which were quite different to the Australian sense of fashion. So when I got into the PhD program, I was doing some work on occupational decision making and how people come to make decisions about the work they do. It was a bit different around that, but I was digging into the literature around how people find themselves in certain roles. And there's a huge body of work that says and identifies that people from low socioeconomic backgrounds don't go to university. They're underrepresented in university courses, and they are even less represented in PhD programs. So I had this sense of otherness, because, I just felt like I shouldn't be here. Nobody in my family. There was a sort of a cultural story or an understanding coming from the East End of London where, very poor people have a responsibility to get out and go to work. So all my family sort of, my parents obviously, finished work at 15, went out and get a job because that was their thing. The sense of social mobility wasn't something that was encouraged. Often it was, well, if you want social mobility, aren't we good enough for you anymore? Or this sense of, my father used to say to me, when are you going to be qualified enough? Why don't you just go, stop learning? So there was this idea of, at some point you have to stop, because what good does it do? And you just couldn't understand why I wanted to just keep learning. And it wasn't collecting qualifications. It was, well, the more I learn, the more I know, the more I can do out in the world. And there was just this sense of, this cultural, leaning towards what's the point in that? Your point is to go out, get working, make the most of yourself in the space that you're in, and that's as much as you can expect for your life, where I obviously was pushing back on that. But it was weird. I remember calling a friend and saying, I'm just reading all of this stuff saying I shouldn't be doing this. It's implausible that I should be in the space that I'm in. And that just sort of fueled that sense of otherness at a subconscious and at a conscious level as well, I think. And that's why it probably hit me so hard when it did.
We'll be revisiting a couple of those words you just used, but I want to stay in this line of the conversation. In some of the conversations I have, and as a non-professional, in some ways, I've used the term interloper, and I don't know if that's the imposter talking or not. But in conversations I've had with psychologists and people with PhDs and people that are actually, truly qualified at a credentialed level to speak to this topic, I've talked a little bit about two things. One, I feel like I gained my authority as a sufferer. Much like a film critic that just watches movies, gains their authority. And I hope you give me permission to have that agency in our conversations.
Of course, yeah.
And I the other thing that I talk a little bit about is, and I use the term blue collar pathology. Mm-hmm. My father should have been a dream killer, but wasn't. He had a lot of traumatic experience in his life growing up. His mother abandoned him. His father drank himself to death and died at a very, very young age. But my father, he was not a dream killer. He was not. I really didn't experience a ton of trauma. But some of the things that I've talked about in the past, and I'm going to tie it into something you said earlier. Some of the experiences I've had in my past, I've said I see in my childhood the presence of an absence. And that was really something where I saw some of the things that maybe weren't trained into my father from his father, whatever that hand down, it didn't manifest in a way where it was, there was abuse or, ridicule or all the things that could have come along with it, that he could have kept that cycle going. It was always, you could do whatever you want. You can be whatever you want to be. You just got to work for it. But there was always the presence of an absence. And I'd like to hear your take. You mentioned subconscious, and it's possible I was experiencing something in my raising during my foundational years. Could you elaborate on that concept a little bit of how the subconscious absorbs?
Yeah, going back to questions around where does this thing come from? People often ask, okay, well, you've explained what it is, you've explained how it manifests, but how is it that I've actually ended up with this? And if I can put it into sort of fairly sort of graphic terms around, it's about the stories that we grow up with. It's about the early years learning, the social learning that we are unconscious of from a very early age. So, from the minute that we are cognizant of the world around us, we are learning. We're learning how to behave, how not to behave, where we sit in the world, what our social class is telling us. The work that I was doing as part of my PhD actually led me to this. It was a completely different topic, but it was how people come to land themselves in certain occupations. And the social learning is exactly the same, in that people divest opportunities for certain jobs based on a couple of points in their lives where they start to divest jobs. And I'm sort of deviating a little bit, but we will come back, is that people start to notice their place in the world, firstly by the fact that they realize that they're going to have to go out into the world and do something as a job. So they can't be a mushroom or a fairy or Batman or a parking meter or something, some random thing. They realize that they have to actually do a job. And so they go, oh, okay, all right, well, all right. So this happens around 3 or 5 years old. And then around 6, 7 years old, they start to divest options by gender. So they start to say, okay, well, look, there are jobs out there that people that I know who are men who are doing certain jobs, and there are people out there who are women and they are doing certain jobs. So I identify as a certain gender, therefore I'm going to have to gravitate to that job or to that job. And so that starts very early on. And then people start to divest options by social status or their sense of social value. So coming back to your point about blue collar jobs, people will often see people doing work around them who are in blue collar roles. And so they say, okay, well, these are the sorts of jobs that are going to be available for me. And like I said, they're not making conscious decisions. This is just stuff that happens through social learning. So people will often stay in the same social space because that's what they see around them. And then by the time a person gets to about 16, 17, they start to think, well, what am I interested in? I'm interested in accounting, or I'm interested in firefighting, or I'm interested in hairdressing or whatever. And so their options become narrower and narrower and narrower. But the point is they make these choices subconsciously by the social learning that's telling them that you need to stay in your lane because of gender, social class, and this sense of interest. And it's the same with IP, that if you find yourself in a role that is pushing back against what your social learning has set you up for. So, for example, I found this with my research with women in STEM occupations. Women were often telling me, look, nobody in my family was in this space. And when I got to be a sound engineer or a civil engineer or a mechanical engineer, I saw nobody like me in that space. So I'm essentially, they're thinking that they're other and thinking I shouldn't be here. So they've pushed against that social learning, and because few people do, they are one of a handful of people who may have pushed back against that decision making that has happened automatically via social learning over a lifetime, from being 3 or 4 years old to actually finding themselves perhaps in a university or in a workplace or whatever. And so where people find themselves in a space where the social narrative, the big end of town narrative that exists out in the world that tells us what we should be doing, how we should be behaving, what roles we should be doing, and how we should be doing it, if we're pushing back on that, then that again is fertile ground for the imposter phenomenon, because it is, I can't see anybody like me, ergo I shouldn't be here. And so it's a long way around to respond to your question, but that's how it happens at a subconscious level. It's implicit social learning that we get from just being out in the world. So coming back to your point about your parents, my parents weren't monsters. They weren't sort of saying you need to stay in your box because they were trying to disparage my aspiration or my capacity for being a pretty nerdy, knowledge-hungry child. It's just that their social learning was, you stay in your lane, you do your thing, this is what can be expected of you. And so unconsciously, they were passing that social narrative on to me. And for it to land in the literature and be, identified as a thing that is out there, that people like me, people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, don't find themselves in universities, was a validation of what had happened to me. It's part and parcel of a policy response. I know across, particularly Western jurisdictions, that there has been a huge policy move from governments to expand access for people from non-traditional backgrounds to get them into university, because it's been recognised that, this social learning creates a barrier to people to go on and extend their capacities by accessing university learning. So this thing is out there. It's a validated thing. People have researched it and they've documented the fact that people like this don't do this thing. So we've got to do something about it to change that social narrative. And so we see it also in, for example, getting women into STEM occupations, or men into early years childcare or education or midwifery. So there are often policy moves to get people who are from non-traditional backgrounds into roles where they are traditionally not visible, because they just don't end up in those roles because of that social learning.
Mm. The wealth of information and knowledge, it's hard for me not to want to get on the couch real quick and just start telling you about my mother and father and unpacking some things. But there were several things you said in there that really, I think, led me down a path of the two stories that I was being told when my father was saying, do anything you want to do, you can be anything you want to be, go kill it. I heard that intellectually. Yep. I understood that, but it sounds like on some subconscious level, I saw a discord between what was being told to me on an intellectual level and then what was being delivered from the reality that I was in. There were all these limitations, some of them truly self-imposed limitations that were underneath the surface that I recognized, but on a subconscious level.
Absolutely. So your father's doing the right thing to be saying, well, look, if you come back to this point about working hard, because this is something that underpins the IP experience as well. That if you work hard and you do the right thing and you take the opportunities that are put in front of you, you can do anything. That's all parents sort of aspire to make sure that they don't crush their kids' aspirations. But there's this social stuff that actually sits out in the world that is banging up against that notion. There's, as you say, there's a whole bunch of barriers that are so implicit to our experience of the world that they're invisible. We don't recognize them until you actually sit, on a balmy afternoon, sitting on the porch with your gin and tonic or your beer or your elderflower cordial. When you start to consider your life and you think, oh, what happened there? And you start to think, oh, okay, yeah, now I get it. I was being told one thing by my parents, but out in the world, this thing isn't going on, which makes my capacity to do other things implausible. And so there's a slide in one of my workshops that says implausibility eats reality for breakfast, because it's implausible that I should have gone to university. It's implausible that I should have been doing the jobs that I'm doing. So if something is implausible, you stand there going, well, how is it that I got here? That somebody's made a mistake. And so what you're doing is making that narrative true by, well, someone's made a monumental issue here. So rather than going, well, yeah, okay, it's implausible, but look, I'm actually doing a PhD. Woohoo, I'm doing a PhD. I've pushed back on all of this stuff that says I shouldn't be here. But people who experience IP, they go with the narrative that says, well, no, it's implausible. So how come? Oh, it must be a mistake, or someone was just being kind to me, or some other mysterious process of the universe has put me here, and at some point I'm going to fall flat on my face. So this stuff is out in the world, and so I sort of suggest there are three parts to the imposter phenomenon, which it's something that came out of my research, where you've got the internal stuff, the stuff that you have as a personal narrative, the gear that you develop from your parents and just being out in the world and perhaps your extended family and perhaps what you gather through school. Then there's the social narrative, the stuff that sits out in the world that tells us what we should be doing, how we should be doing it, how society deals with otherness and inclusion and those sorts of things. And then there's the workplace stuff. And so you've got two bits that are outside of our control but are telling us or setting up a framework for what we should be doing. And that bangs up against or fuels the narrative that we've developed just as growing up and being human and being out in the world. And so for me, there are two bits of the argument that are outside of our control. And they're the things that we need to, because you can change the way you think, you can change the way you see yourself in the world, but you have to understand how those other two elements are actually fueling that sense of, well, I shouldn't be here because it's absolutely implausible that I should be doing the thing that I'm doing. It could be, women in STEM or men in midwifery or even, people in leadership, for example.
I was actually talking to my wife the other day about something I read about Aristotle, and I think it comes from drama, discourses on drama. Yep. And he says something along the lines of that a probable impossibility is preferred over an improbable possibility. And essentially it's, if a talking unicorn were to come down and walk into the play, everyone will go along with it. But Terri going to university, that triggers something. And the power of storytelling, I've asked people before, like, is this just a story? Is Imposter, Is that what it is? That is a story. And I keep getting the same answers, yes. And I wonder if that there's not something at play that sort of the fundamentals of drama and storytelling, that this is playing out in real time in what we experience.
Absolutely. For me, that it is at the absolute platform of the IP experience, the stories that we tell ourselves. And of course, we tell ourselves stories about how we behave and what we should be doing and, how we exist in the world and how we bounce off of other people and those sorts of things. And so when you come to the imposter experience, we're telling ourselves a story to make our expectations true. It's not coming back to your quote about Aristotle, which I'm going to pinch from you because that was just brilliant. It is exactly true. The fact that I'm here is absolutely implausible. So I'm going to create a story which dispels all of the success I had because it's implausible that should happen. So I'm going to make up a story that people are just being kind or someone's made a monumental mistake and at any point I'm going to get tapped on the shoulder. And that story becomes true. So creating counter stories is, as an author called Lindemann Nelson suggests, is a narrative act of insubordination. You're being insubordinate to the story that you've created. You're pushing back on it. And so but it's not something that you can do before morning tea on a Friday morning. It is something time and energy and effort to determine what your story is and unpack that and then say, okay, well, look, what's the reality here? And so it comes back to the point where we know that people who experience IP can't see their track record of successes. They are unable to internalize their success because they've discounted it and they've pushed it onto external things like someone else. It was my team. I just got lucky. Someone's made a mistake, whatever. So being able to internalize that success is part of that narrative act of insubordination. It's changing the story to, it's implausible that I should be here, but it is, and so the counter narrative to that is, well, look at all this track record of success. Is it plausible that someone, a supervisor, for example, in my case, has for 4 years turned up to my supervisory meetings and kept up the pretense that they're just being nice to me? Is it, it's much less plausible than I've actually, generated some success here. So we often dispel the effort and energy and qualifications of other people. We say, well, look, the professors who were working with me, they must be idiots. because they're telling me I'm doing a good job. Well, they're clearly deranged people. That's much less plausible than actually you're doing a good job. But our stories have to be, no, I need to keep my imposter story going. So to unpick that, then of course you can create counter narratives, which, as I said, takes time and energy and some effort, because it really becomes it can be really uncomfortable to accept that all that track record of success that you've got stretching behind you was, even though you may believe it to be implausible, is actually yours. And that's where the discomfort comes in, because you have to internalize all of that and recognize it for the fact that it is. And of course, that's pushing up against a story that has been created over a lifetime.
And storytelling is the most powerful force on the planet. Don't let anyone say you otherwise. You know, we've talked on the show about different ways imposter manifests, and I want to come back to one word. If you saw me scribbling over here on my pad, I was writing one word, and we talk a lot on the show about the ways that imposter manifests, and we've even one of our guests, Chris Kelso, he names it the imposter. He talks about it as though it's an anthropomorphized thing, shoulder, standing on our shoulder, whatever it might be. And this is the first time I've heard the term insubordination. There's some nuance in there. One of it is that it's assuming it's inherent that the imposter's in charge, that the imposter's the boss.
Yep.
And then that term, I've never thought about it in that regard, that this is an upending, this is a rebellion.
Absolutely. Other people I've spoken to have said that they give their inner imposter voice, that chatter, a name. And one of the ways of actually being insubordinate is to actually create that anthropomorphized character where you actually talk to it. So you have the conversation where you, rather than trying to bury it and ignore it, it's going to be there anyway, so I may as well have a chat to it. Other people have called it, the mad woman who lives in the attic. One of the people I spoke to, there's this entity that lives up here. Mad. But having these sort of, these stories, these conversations in your mind that are telling you that you're not good enough, that you only got to where you are by a process of mysterious osmosis, or someone had made a mistake, or people are being kind to you. And it's where you have that conversation, you go, is it really? I hear what you're saying, but I don't agree. And that's where that insubordination comes. It is that rebellion. It's like, no, look, there's a whole bunch of evidence that I've got here that tells me that I've done the work, I've achieved against objective measures, and here is the evidence. And that's one thing that people who experience the imposter phenomenon have difficulty doing, is seeing that and taking it on. So if you can start to push back on that anthropomorphized character and start telling them, no, look, here is the evidence, then you can start pushing back on that learned sense of otherness and B, implausibility. You can start to recraft it. But it's all, for me, other people have different ideas, but for me it's all about the story, because it's the way that humans learn.
I have to ask a question that's a recurring question on the show. We've asked it of ourselves. We've asked it to some guests, and I'm going to ask it to you now. And I feel like this entire piece is like it was designed for this question. But from an abstract, from a conceptual thought process, we've asked before, that sound of the imposter, the voice of the imposter.
Mm-hmm.
What does it sound like for you?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never really thought about it in overt terms like that. For me, it's an incessant chatter. It's almost like a cricket, or as we have in Australia called cicadas, that incessant noise. It's you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing this, this is wrong, you're going to fail, you're going to fall on your face. And it's almost as if it's something that just plays in the background. But it also manifests in a physical way. And lots of other people have told me that they experience this as well, that the flight or fight brick in the stomach, and of course that's an adaptive, human adaptive response, that if you're facing something that is you should be fearful of, then you run away. Or that's a natural human response. So having that brick in the stomach is something that I experience physically, and a sense of wanting to push things that don't fit with that original narrative away. So I think it's a physical response, as well as that incessant. It is like a sound of crickets, but it is just ongoing. You shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be doing this. Yeah. Who do you think you are? You're getting too big for your boots. Get back in your box. Stay in your lane. Wind your neck in. All of those sorts of things. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've never really overtly been asked that before. Thank you.
Well, it's in the past, it's shown, I think it's exposed some real interesting things. One of our co-hosts, when asked that question, he heard the voice of his father. And, that in a lot of ways, it's so telling as to what is the source of this and where does it come from. And he openly speaks about some of the trauma from his past. Yeah. When I was asked that question, for me, it was very similar to what you were saying. We have cicadas also here in the South, in Tennessee. I didn't use that term, but incessant is a good word for it. It's always present, and I think if I'm remembering it right, I also said it's often quiet. That's when it's most sinister. The mad woman in the attic, I can see her coming. I kind of know what I can deal with that in some ways, but that sinister, slight voice is the one that's often really, really hard to fight.
It's the stuff of horror movies, isn't it? Obviously, in films like The Ring, you get this almost just below the threshold of human hearing. You can hear it, but you can hear it now. But it's important to say that there are ways of quieting it and putting it to bed. And I think, getting to grips with what the thing is and how it plays out for you as an individual, because it's not a constant thing, in that the construct is variable, because we've all got our own stories. We all have our own ways of coming to the world, and we exist in different contexts. So everybody is going to have something slightly different going on for them, and the response then needs to be slightly different for people as well.
Do you believe that it will always be with you?
I think on some level it will always be with me, but I don't think it has the same impact as it has for me in the past. I think, knowledge is a powerful thing. Once you know what's going on, you can do something about it. And I think talking to a good friend of mine, Dr. Larissa Bartlett, who does a lot of her work in mindfulness, is, coming back to the moment and, having that sense of groundingness. So doing some work, unpacking your stories, understanding at what point this thing is actually going to raise its head. Pauline Rose Clance's work on the imposter cycle is incredibly important on identifying how it actually plays out in a sort of a normative way. So you know when it's going to come, so that you can do something about it, and that's key for me. So I know that if I'm going to be doing a keynote speech next week, I know that at some point or another I'm going to say, why have they asked me? And then I have a conversation with myself and go, well, how many times have I done keynote speeches? And so you just have I just have a conversation with myself, and it is dispelled. For some people, it might be much less insidious and much less long term. For different people, it can be really quite debilitating. But being able to unpack it and understand how it actually plays out for you, I think, is key, because it is an individual thing. But sorry, it's a long way of answering your question. I think it will always be there in the back of my mind, but I know how to deal with it now.
Well, every word you're saying is leading us to great places. So never apologize for the wealth that you're spending here with us. There's two directions I want to go, and I've got to pick which one. I want to ask a question that could really take up the rest of our time, but I want to come back to public speaking. Does everyone experience it?
No. This is one of those social media myths that I call out every time I get the opportunity. There's this idea that just a bit of self-doubt, get over yourself, everybody has it. No, that's not true. Everybody experiences self-doubt, and that can be really quite useful, because it's a little message to you saying, look, perhaps you've got a little bit of a gap in your knowledge or your capabilities or the way that you're doing something that you might just want to work on. So, it's that sense of, yeah, okay, I reckon I could probably do this, but I might need to polish up this thing or this thing or this thing. That is fairly universal. I think that's a fairly human experience. And while self-doubt is certainly part of the imposter experience, it's not the whole story. So the imposter experience is much more broad. It can be much more long-term. It can, as we've mentioned, can have some fairly dire and long-standing consequences that self-doubt doesn't lead to. The other thing that I think is useful to identify is that self-doubt, you go into something with self-doubt. So, for example, you're offered a promotion and you get the promotion and you have a bit of self-doubt about being able to perform. There's this sense of hope, this sense of understanding that if I just get a bit more experience and, once I get my feet under the desk and I'm well and truly embedded in this team, everything's going to be fine. I'm going to get over this and it'll play out just as successfully as I could possibly hope, and in a way that my employers have trusted me with this new job, that they think I'm going to be able to do this. So there's a sense of hope there, or a sense of expectation that self-doubt will go away. IP isn't like that. There is, for many people, and certainly most of the people that I've spoken to, there is that pressing, I shouldn't be here, I shouldn't be doing this, and even I could get 100 qualifications and 40 PhDs and 127 certificates that say that I do this thing well. I'm still going to doubt myself. I'm still going to be in a position where I don't know enough. I don't have the capabilities or the qualifications or the capacities to do this thing. And that's the tragedy of it, because we're talking about people who clearly do have the capacity, the qualifications, the inherent talent to be able to do certain things. They just can't see it. And there's not that hope that at some point or another, everything is going to be okay. And that's, one of the things that plays out in the workplace, in that often people will get to say, mid part of their career, and they think, I've got to this point by some mistake or some mysterious universal weirdism. The next step that I take is the one that I'm going to get found out about. It's stressful enough for me to keep up this pretense in this role. The next one I take is the one that's really going to finish me off. So you know what? I'm just going to sit here and bob along under the radar and allow people to come from behind me and take those more senior roles or those different roles. And that's, for me, I often consider that to be one of the reasons why we see underrepresentation of certain people in very senior roles or in board roles or in C-suite roles, because the people who are eminently, or some people who are eminently qualified have given up because they don't have that hope that if I continue on this path, everything's going to be fine. It's if I continue on this path, I'm genuinely going to get found out. And that's the tragedy of it. Highly qualified, capable, talented individuals are sitting in roles, bobbing along because they fear the next step they take is the one that is really going to come crashing down around their ears.
Mm. I want to look at maybe the convex of that statement, because I've also found in conversations, and honestly, this is something I experience. I'm a ham. I love the light. I love the spotlight. I love being on a stage. And this is very weird, but public speaking is one of the areas where the chatter, the cicada, the some of the terms that we've used there actually quiets down. And it depends on what I'm talking about. And oddly enough, if I'm talking about it, here's this meta beyond meta phenomenon scenarios. But when I'm talking about imposter syndrome, it's the quietest that it ever is. And I am drawn to that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the dynamics of that, or the reinforcement scenarios? What am I doing? What's wrong with me there?
There's nothing wrong with you. Weirdly, I have the same thing. 2 minutes onto the stage, and I feel like I'm flying, and yet I'm highly introverted. And we know that imposter phenomenon is related or positively correlated with introversion. It's one of those paradoxes that come with the experience of IP, that people who experience IP are often, they don't want scrutiny. They want to be known for something. They want to be known to be good. They want their capabilities to be recognized, but they don't necessarily want the scrutiny that comes with it. But public speaking, you're out there on stage. There's nothing, there's not much more inviting scrutiny than standing up on stage in front of a couple hundred people. I don't have an answer for you, because I think your stuff, and it's something, for me, it's something I'm really passionate about, and I want to share it. And so it's probably something that's pushing back against that story, saying, well, look, this is a space where you absolutely know your stuff, you're prepared for questions, you've lived it, so you've got a lived experience that you can share with other people. But I don't know whether this is the same for you, but when I get off stage and people say, oh my God, that was brilliant, it's, just get away with your good praise. I can't be doing with that. So it's as if for the 10, 15, 30 minutes that you're actually talking to a crowd of people in the spotlight, inviting scrutiny, that you're in a space that is almost like that bubble that nobody can actually burst that bubble, because you know your stuff so well. You are so in it. And I mentioned that I'd come back to this hard work thing, and that people who experience IP think that you have to work exceptionally hard to actually have success. And some people are just naturally good at certain things. And so if they're naturally good and they haven't worked very hard at something, then they think, well, I haven't earned this, ergo I shouldn't be doing this thing. So I'm wondering whether it comes back to that point, that you've worked really hard, you know your stuff backwards, forwards, sideways, upside down, and round again. So there is that absolute sense of being in the right space, that's where you belong. If there is a sense of belonging, then IP doesn't have the space to intrude. You take yourself off the stage and put yourself in a different context, and that's that cicada sound, the crickets come back again. I wonder if it's that.
And this is fascinating. One of the things that I was at an event, and I was speaking to a young lady that was a neuroscientist, and we somehow got on the topic, because if you talk to me longer than 5 minutes, I'm probably going to bring it up. That's probably why. But I mentioned it to her, and we got into this this deep conversation about the differences between the brain and the mind. And I think a lot of what we've talked about is centered around the mind, the conscious, the subconscious, all of the things that are indicative of the mind. And we came to we came to one question, and that question was how much of this could actually be physiological. And there's something in the conversation about the stage health that we experience, that whatever it is, maybe there's some version of adrenaline and, you know, norepinephrine and all these different chemicals that normally shut people down and make them fear it, what more than some people say it's a fear that's higher than death.
Yeah.
Yet for us, it's medicine.
Hmm.
Could that point to a brain mind conversation that maybe we need to have?
Could well be. I've never really thought about it in those terms. Yeah. I'd need to unpack that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
when it was one of those sort of epiphany moments when I was,
Yeah.
talking to this lady, and her specialization was brain, not mind. And so
Mhm.
she saw it from a very different lens, and she asked that question, and I was like, well, shit. I'm gonna have to go
Yeah.
research that one.
Oh no, there's another tangent for me to go down.
So many tangents, but
Yeah.
it is such a you use the term paradox, and that we've used that term before in conversations on the show, that there are so many examples of paradoxical things. The father that tells me you can do anything you want, you can have anything you want, you just got to work hard to get it. And then the underside of that is this opposite of what I'm experiencing, the discord that happens. And so, seeming clash there, contradiction, maybe not paradox, but there are some paradoxical behavior patterns in
Mm.
high performing individuals. Dr. Clance's work was about high performing women.
That's
So
right.
they got there for a reason. What was the driver behind that? And why on earth would it, if it just shut us down and we just crawled into holes, that makes sense. But the way that it manifests is just so sometimes nonsensical.
Yeah. When you start to think about some of the conversations that I've had with very senior people, really, unbelievably qualified, recognized in their fields as being, at the peak of their game, and they're still going, yeah, anybody could do this. This is, I don't know why they've given me this award or this reward or this qualification. Surely anybody could do it. So yeah, it's real. The paradox that I often talk about is the maladaptive perfectionism banged up against the fear of failure. If you are working to within an inch of your life to get something as perfect as it possibly can be, how can you still have an expectation that it's going to fall flat on its face? So that's another one, that maladaptive behavior that pushes people to be superhuman, and yet still have this expectation that it's going to fail. It's another one.
That there's something that, and this just occurred to me, and some of the things that you were saying about, you were speaking about hard work, you were speaking about maybe types of work, and I don't know. This is something I'll have to unpack, and maybe I'm hoping to get on the couch with you. And we definitely we're at the end of the almost at the end of the hour, so we don't have the time that I would love to spend on this. But I talk about my father. He turned a wrench for a living. He was a mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
There was grease on his hands. He came home and washed his hands with lava soap. And he told me one time, "Don't ever come home and have to wash the day off your hands." But I feel like a lot of where this could be additional to or the root of, I'm not really sure, but I've found my way into white collar work, and there was this gnawing feeling that I could never quite explain or figure out for myself, that what is this feeling. And I think something you just said brought me to a thought that just popped into my head, and it was, you never turned a wrench. And there were probably these value systems that were being established in me about the level of hard work and the type of work specifically.
Yep.
And then I go in and I'm, lifting nothing heavier than a pen, and I feel guilty about it.
Yep.
But I don't know how to name that. I didn't know how until found my way to imposter syndrome. Someone sitting over a lunch asked me a simple question: have you ever heard of imposter syndrome? And what I tell people is it was as though someone just twisted a lens, and so many things came into focus that I'd never. And it wasn't nothing got solved. It was the start of something, not the beginning of something. But it really pushed me down a path of understanding. And I think you just gave me. I want to thank you for just giving me a moment of clarity and a way to kind of understand that angst, that feeling that I would experience when I might be the output. I was killing it, doing the thing, but I wasn't turning the wrench. And my value system was saying, you didn't do anything. It was too easy. You didn't work hard enough. You didn't sweat.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You're right. Talking about this is just the beginning. The hard work comes from actually unpacking. And it happens, like you say, the most unexpected times where something lands and you go, man, that lens has shifted and I'm seeing things a little bit more differently. And it's often the responses I get back from people that have sat in my workshops or I've spoken to about this. They often say, now it's clear. Now I actually get it. Now I understand. But as you say, it is the beginning of the conversation, not the resolution to it. Yeah. The hard work comes later.
Well, I'm gonna finish this up. I had 10 questions prepared. We jumped those a long time ago and went down some fascinating paths. The questions I had prepared would not have done this conversation justice. And so thank you for this incredible experience and moment. I have one last question. And this is something I asked of a guest, a previous guest, 2 guests ago. And I asked her, and she's a professional, Dr. Jill Stoddard. I asked her, who else should we be listening to? Like, I love hearing your input on this, Dr. Stoddard, but who else should we be listening to? And she named one name, and that name was you. What's your name? And don't just give me Dr. Stoddard's back, but we can include her if you like.
I know you've already spoken to her.
Yeah. Who else do we need to be looking at?
That's a really tough one because there are so many interesting people who are doing some amazing work. Kevin Coakley has just recently put out a collected work of essays. I know that he's been working in this space. But on a personal level, listen to your own inner insubordinate voice. I mean, because there are a bunch of people who are doing some really amazing stuff at unpacking what the IP really is and how it plays out for people, but also what the interventions or responses can be, because that has been weirdly over the last 40 odd years been not as well researched as what it is and who experiences it and how many people are experiencing it. But Kevin, I think, would be a person to talk to because he's, as I say, just edited a book of a whole raft of journal articles looking at this from different perspectives. So he would be able to give you an overview of all of those really key pieces of work.
I got to go back to that insubordinate word. That is as an analogy in the storytelling. It is rich and it is tasty and it has utility. It's something that I think in the twisting of that lens and for me as a sufferer and for any listener, I feel like that's going to have utility because it's something that you can put into play for your characters in this story of battling the imposter.
Yeah, it also has a bit of rage in it too, which I like.
Well, Terri, this has been fantastic. I want to thank you for coming on. It's Saturday there, and so thank you for spending some weekend time with me. It's been fascinating. It's been eye-opening. it's just been a treat. And so thank you. And on behalf of the Impodsters here on the show, my co-hosts, and all of the listeners out there, just thank you for this time.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. It's been lovely talking to you, Johnny.
Wonderful.